Hi, let's talk about day two of our 30-day challenge on Hacker Rank. Remember, day two is really day three because they're starting with a zero index. Depending on what language you use, you can either index with zero or you start indexing with one. It depends on how you view the mathematical order of counting integers. We're not going to get into that philosophical debate. In this scenario, Python and C++ start their indexing operations at index 0. So we'll be using 0 as the true value to start counting from integers or to start counting integers. In this scenario, we're talking about how to tip different service staff, whether it's waitresses or waiters, and we'll talk about how the syntax works down here, what it means for there to be a function or passing different parameters to functions. I'll also go through the start of a new series. So after the 30-day challenge, I told everybody that I was going to start looking at LeetCode. And essentially there are so many problems on LeetCode. Let's see how many problems there are. So LeetCode is definitely an industry standard for competitive programming. Eventually, I'd like to create a competitive SIGINT site that will be entirely different than what LeetCode offers. But right now, I'd recommend it for those that are starting, those that are intermediate, and those that are trying to get jobs within Silicon Valley. So when I got out of the military, October of last year, I signed up for a master's program, and then in December, I started looking at programming. So since December, really the time frame was December to April. I did about 41% of LeetCode, and I solved a lot of problems, spent a lot of time on this while I was doing my master's. So now I've transitioned to more of the cybersecurity area and looking at how to hack networks or how to give you information on penetration tests. Right now, that's been consuming a lot of my time from April to now into the future. Should be done by the end of the summer, but wanted to show that LeetCode has a substantial amount of problems to go off of. So they have 1908. We won't be touching all that over the next couple of months. We'll be starting from ground zero, so I'll be going through each of them. I'll go one through as many as I can, trying to show you how I solved so many so quickly and how I took about 3 months and learned how to be in the top 5% of competitive programming contests online. So we'll talk about some different nuances and things like that. Well, let's talk about Hacker Rank first, and then after the 30 days, we'll transition into LeetCode entirely. So here, you got to load different libraries, so use import. And if you're familiar with bash scripting, then normally they put bin bash at the top, just like this, bin Python. And that's for Linux operating systems to be able to read it and understand what that file is. Then you go to the import statements and you're importing math for working with different operations, but we're not using them here. OS to work with OS, random to use random integers, re for regular expressions, and then you have system, which is working with the system. But once again, we're going to be using very specific tools here, and this is such a basic script that most of these libraries aren't called, and they're just redundant, but it's a generic template that they use. So going forward, the first line that we're going to look at is line 20. It says if underscore underscore name underscore underscore equals equals main. This is saying that essentially if you're in the main program, then you should be running the stuff below it, or the operating system should be running the stuff below it. The interpreter should be running the stuff below it. So in this case, you look at meal cost, and it's going to be a float value. So you input one string or one line from the input or standard in, and you split it based on spaces, essentially creating a list. But in this scenario, it's redundant because you just have one value that's coming in, 12.00. And so in that case, you can just convert it to float, since input in Python converts it to string, or it's a raw string. Once again, these are redundant strips because you're not really working with spaces. You're just working with one particular instance or one value that doesn't have a length that's separated by a space. Once again, this is a generic template that they put in HackerRank. You convert it to int because the input is normally a raw string. And then you call a function. This function needs to be defined beforehand. And in this case, we're passing different parameters, 3 parameters, meal cost, tip percent, and tax percent. And we're using a formula derived earlier in the problem set. Essentially, here is what it looks like. You take the tip, take the tax, total cost, which is the meal cost plus tip plus tax. And then you round that total cost. We're doing it in one line. It's pretty simple. You take the tax percent divided by 100, times it by the meal cost, which was already given to you. You add it to the meal cost divided by 100 times the tip percent plus meal cost, and then round it. And you print that, and that's the problem 3 for the 30-day challenge. Once again, that formula is provided to you. You just have to solve it, I guess, mathematically or algorithmically in code. And there's not too much to it. We'll talk about another problem since this one was pretty short. This is going to be the first LeetCode problem that we're covering. Once again, we're going to be covering time permitting. We're going to be covering a LeetCode problem every day. So in this scenario, we're given a two-sum, or the first problem on LeetCode. And what it's asking for is, it's saying you need to find 2 different integers within your list that combine to the target. There is one solution. However, it wants you to find it in less than n squared, which means in less than 2 for loops, or a for loop nested with a for loop. And so what companies are looking at this? As you can see, there's a lot of companies. Microsoft, Apple, Amazon. LeetCode's a pretty good standard to use for competitive programming. Not competitive SIGINT, so hopefully get that started soon. Just want to show you that programmers aren't perfect. They can tell you that they're the best in the world, but even the best in the world make mistakes. They don't like to tell you that in a lot of videos, but sometimes it takes a little trial and error. In this case, I wanted to test something. I wanted to test a little less than n squared. I mean, the worst case scenario would be n squared, but it's checking to see if the values are equal to target, and to return it early, so break it early, or to determine if the values are greater than the target, to essentially move to the next x within the first for loop. So in order to do this, you need to call enumeration or enumerate function on your list, and then sort it with a lambda sorting. Essentially, this is the syntax to use within the sorted function. And your key is going to be lambda, and the section you use is going to be the thing you're sorting on. So in this scenario, I'm going to be sorting on the first index within each item within a list. And then I'm going to store it as a list so that I can then use it. This passed 53 out of 54 test cases, so obviously it's not going to pass the last one. And I wrote a different algorithm to then pass the last one. I just wanted to show you guys that, or show everybody that ON squared was really a stipulation specified within the problem set. So going further, how should we look at this? Well, there's something called a two-pointer method that we touched upon before. Really, the problem before was a one-sided topic, so I guess a one-sided pointer going from right to left. In this scenario, we're going to be going left and right at the same time, looking at the first pointer starting at 0 and the second pointer starting at the last index within your list. And essentially, you want to make sure, and it's specified in the solution, that each element that's given within the answer is only used once, so you can't use the same element twice. So essentially, the two pointers will never equal each other. So this is just making sure when we work with two-pointer methods later that we don't, I guess, cross lines and then keep going and go forever and cause a program error. So essentially here we're looking at finding the target value, and I store the target value in a temporary, I guess, variable here, a value, so that I don't have to keep rewriting it. It makes the syntax a lot easier. In this case, if we found the target, or if we found the two sum target, then we return those two values. And the enumerate, as we talked about earlier, is going to deliver indices within the first section on each item, and then the second section on each item is going to be the actual value. And so the reason why we did this is so that we could essentially sort the list but maintain an index of where the original numbers or values were stored at. So essentially, if we had a 4 in the second slot, then when we sort it, and 4 is the largest in our example, then 4 would be at the end, but it would lose the previous values index. So we need to use enumerate in order to store that index. And so in this scenario, if the value is less than the target, then you can increase the left pointer. And if the value is greater than the target, and you increase the right pointer or decrease the right pointer, and essentially you're sandwiching it to the value you get. 1, 1 is just a placeholder. Same with the other function that, or other solution that we're looking at, placeholder of 0 or null. And the reason why that's done is because the problem set said there was exactly one solution, so this will never actually be run, and it's just to make the program return a random value in case for some reason the test case does not provide or does not adhere to the requirements set forth in the problem. Once again, want to look at runtime and memory use. Here it's running about 40% of what it could be, and I'm sorry, it's running faster than 40% of the other test cases, and it's running with 15% less memory than the rest of the test cases, the rest of the solutions posted on LeetCode. And so what this is really saying is that we could go through and write a different algorithm to solve this that's more efficient in the time complexity and more efficient in the space complexity or space storage. But that's not really of concern right now. Concern is just understanding how to solve this problem and to use the two-pointer method in the future. Once again, I appreciate your help and your support, and I look forward to seeing you on different channels, on different videos. Please comment and subscribe. Have a great day. Bye.